G'day and welcome to the Niggly Anish cast, coming at you from a Thursday morning, fresh off the first little splash of Olympics with the football ferns going down to Australia 2-1. We'll save a lot of the Olympic chat for tomorrow's almost daily Olympics podcast, which will be on the Patreon feeds. So the best way to support the Niche Case is on Patreon. And then you also get the bonus podcast following the Olympics, just debriefing a whole lot of Olympics matters on a almost daily basis. And so check that out, patreon.com/LEL Niche Case. We will also publish a almost daily Olympics blog, probably on Monday after this crazy weekend of Olympics action over in Tokyo. So keep an eye on those. We've got two big things covering the Olympics, so there's always plenty of niche case Olympic content. Then we've got our sprinkling of Kiwis sports, whatever sporting observations we might make on our Substack email, which you can sign up to at www.thenichecase.substack.com. And every Monday and Friday afternoon, you'll get an email from the Niche Case with all our content straight into your email, as well as some extra yarns. And of course, we're always writing about Kiwi sports at the niche-case.com. Wobbly Wildcard. You got a little bit of a flurry of mindfulness to start this show up there in the naughty north of Aotearoa.
Certainly do. Flurry of mindfulness today reads, "You are the sky, everything else is just the weather."
No, we take the weather with you everywhere you go. Is that what you're meaning, or something like that?
Sure. I'm guessing that's what whichever Finn brother it was wrote that song was getting at. A little bit of little flurry of mindfulness about being the sky and everything else is the weather.
And you can always be the weather, everywhere you go. But you probably want to try and be the sky, and just let the weather come and go.
Yeah, yes.
There you go.
Weather ever changing, is how it goes.
Indeed, indeed. Today's episode is all about non-Olympic stuff, because we do have a lot of Olympic stuff happening, and we are covering all the Olympic stuff pretty intensely in the written format with the Almost Daily blogs, and we've got the podcast on the Patreon channel as well. So we're going to touch on a few non-Olympic matters, and it's kind of a busy time with different things around the Olympics wildcard. We shout out to Giannis Antetokounmpo. Milwaukee Bucks won the NBA Finals, and I also just want to shout out defense, because I did drop an idea at the start of this season. We had Sean Marks leading the Brooklyn Nets, assembling a bit of a super team that wasn't exactly churning out the big defensive performances and numbers, but they were so good offensively that it was an interesting juncture in sport from my perspective of the idea that defense wins championships. And then for a variety of different reasons, playoff basketball being different to regular season and all that good stuff that we love about sport, the Milwaukee Bucks kind of won a championship revolving around defense. Giannis had lots of blocks. Drew Holiday had some steals. It was a fantastic defensive performance, and I think you still need a really good defense to win a championship in whatever sport. So it's a big period for defense. Shout out defense. Wildcard, do you have any quick thoughts on defense or Giannis or the Milwaukee Bucks?
Or how about the entire Antetokounmpo family, who apparently, because Giannis comes into the league and he's the Greek freak, right? People didn't necessarily know what to expect from him, when he first, right? Because he was in Steven Adams' draft and he got drafted below Steven Adams. So there's a starter for you. And it's been one of those things, this constant, the defensive minded thing is definitely a factor to look at. That's cool. That's seeing a big win for teams that actually play in both directions is awesome. And good for the sport, I think. Well, I think arguably even bigger for the sport is the idea, because I get kind of I think most people probably do. Almost a little bit nauseated just dealing with the constant talk about trades and free agency and how do you assemble a team around a superstar and this team's on the clock, that team's on the clock. Right now, Steven Adams is caught right up in the midst of this with the New Orleans Pelicans who are trying to put the best possible team around Zion Williamson because if they don't, he might leave. And if he leaves, then they're buggered. There's no way back from this. It's hard enough to get a superstar. You can't be letting them escape. And all these dramas where it's like, yes, this is true. And that is a major factor for the Pelicans. But like, it's a couple years away with Zion. Like, it's not immediately now or never, but yes, like, decisions that are made now do have ramifications down the line. Sean Marks will tell you that as a general manager. But the Milwaukee Bucks have been through this so much with Antetokounmpo and trying to obviously there was that time where would he sign the Supermax and you're just having to deal with just mindless chatter on the internets about like the Warriors wanted to sign him, the Lakers want to sign him because the Lakers want to sign everyone, and etc. and people speculating what would he look like on this team or that team. In the end, Giannis stayed true to Milwaukee, re-signed, and then won a championship. It was awesome. Like, it's great for the smaller market teams. It's great for I think the culture of the NBA. Probably there's nothing wrong with it per se, but like, I do think this is a nice little wake-up call to a lot of superstars that you don't have to go like chasing the ring. It means more if you win it at like the team you've been drafted for, and B, like, you can win it at the team you've been drafted for. You don't have to go play for the Lakers, or you know the Warriors or whoever to be able to win something like that. So that's cool. But one of the funny things about trying to keep Giannis happy was that his brothers kept popping up in the league, and his brothers are okay. They're like serviceable basketball players. It'd probably be amazing if they played for the Breakers. At NBA level, they're sort of like fringe roster members. But one of them is currently on I can't remember if it's Thanasis or Costas, but one of them is currently on the Bucks with Giannis. The other one was on the Lakers last year. So all three of them, not only have three of those brothers played in the NBA, and think about like all the stories you hear about Giannis and his incredible like upbringing. Obviously, it's the same for his brothers as well. So there's three of them that made it to the NBA. All three of them are now champions, and I believe they're the first ever trio of siblings to have all won an NBA championship. So I just saw that online earlier this morning while I was doing my morning perusals, and I thought that's kind of crazy. Like, it's one thing if it's well, I mean, that's crazy regardless of whether you come from like a well-known American basketballing family and you went to the right universities and you got all the pathways and everything like that. That's still crazy if three brothers all play NBA and all win a championship. To do it from the background that the Antetokounmpo brothers have come from is incredible.
Yeah, I think you got to listen to a bit more of Freddie Gibbs, their wild card, because to quote Freddie Gibbs, real G's move in silence like Giannis. So
there you go.
Got to drop that Giannis. But that's actually kind of the crazy thing about that line is Lil Wayne had one where it was like real G's move in silence like lasagna, or something around that premise of G being silent and lasagna, and then there was another one from Russ where it's like real G's move in silence my designer is another one, but that Freddie Gibbs song, it's from him and Madlib. The song is called Giannis, and this is the whole verse up to that point. It's kind of interesting, just for a tangent. Industry got you sleep, but bitch I'm woke. I know the devil. These N-word be falling off every day like Ace Hood Rolly Bezel. Ends don't understand that 360 mean a percentage stream or a percentage of every income stream. That record ain't doing no numbers. You trip on your management and your legal team. I done been dropped before, talked about and wrote off before. Heart on my sleeve and the ATF at my mama door. Mr. Mongol told me, Freddie, fix up your posture, bro. Walk tall and never show ends more than they gotta know. Real G's move in silence like Giannis. So shout out to Giannis. And Nigerians, because Nigerians are doing big things around the world. with other countries like Israel Adesanya, Kamaru Usman. So there's a lot of that kind of African, maybe the story of immigration. There's a global story of immigration being had with a lot of these African athletes moving to other countries and having great success as well. Like that's another, because Giannis is Greek, grew up in Greek, but there was a quote that I saw that him say that when he goes home, they don't live like in a Greek culture in their house. The traditions and stuff in their house are Nigerian, and it's a common thread across the world sport at the moment as well.
Yeah, I think what's his name? Bukayo Saka from the English football team has Nigerian parents as well. Like there's he's obviously someone who's been in the news recently as well. Like there's not quite for high achieving, but I mean he had a great tournament, that dude. So up until the final penalty, and I thought it was a little bit of a stitch up that he had to take that anyway, but whatever. Yeah, shout out to Nigeria. What a country. Let's see what they do at the Olympics as well, because they're always one of those, like, they'll be one of the top African teams for sure on the medal list, and you always get a few, like, it's funny how you get sport, like, nations that sort of are good at certain sport, like Jamaican sprinters and New Zealand rowers and things like that, and that's one of the cool things about the Olympics, but I think that's probably a tangent we can save for another time, because this is the non-Olympic podcast. Well, where do we go from there? Well, what have we actually got on the agenda today? What are our non-Olympic sports to talk about?
Well, while we're on the topic of Nigeria, the Nigerian basketball team did beat USA in an exhibition game, and just food for thought, what the likes of Tamalolo, Tokiaho, those type of characters did in representing Tonga, the biggest scale around the world is some of those athletes opting to represent their cultural heritage as opposed to the country that they grew up in or they moved to. So it'll be like Giannis opting to play for Nigeria, which kind of similar situation, like Tonga was moving in the right direction and then roped in some of the big dogs. Nigeria's moving in the right direction. Who's to stop Giannis, unless international basketball eligibility nitty gritty pending, but like the equivalent is Giannis going back to Nigeria and representing Nigeria as opposed to Greece. But yes, non-Olympic sports wildcard. It's a interesting time, I brought up the NBA finals because there's just those kind of events happening. We have the culmination of the NBA season. Then you go over to England and the 100 is starting, which is a cricket competition designed specifically to fit into a TV format and thus bring in more numbers, which seems to have been received pretty well. First game was a women's game this morning. And remember, T20 cricket started in England. So England has a bit of a history at innovating, coming up with these new innovative games around cricket. And we've kind of got enough cricketing formats, but always try to be open-minded. And who's to say that the 100, because TV networks around the world will look at this and be like, oh, here's a format that is specifically designed to be broadcasted for this best possible thing, and then other TV networks around the world might take it up, and then obviously the national bodies will want to take it up because it's more money. So kind of just have to keep an open mind with the global landscape of cricket. But that is to say there's just these big events happening around the world alongside the Olympics. York Flying Kiwis beat continues. In England, we also have the Royal London One Day Cup, which is the one-day cricket section of the Kiwi County Tour. A lot of the best players are probably going to be playing in the 100, which I won't follow that closely, but we'll be interested to see if there's any Kiwis popping up on the 50 over scene in England. And tonight, wildcard, we do have the start of the New Zealand NBL semi-finals. So the Thursday night New Zealand time, we have the first, we have both games. So the Wellington Saints versus the Huskies, the Hawke's Bay Hawks versus the Southland Sharks. Good that my man Hiram Harris is there with the Hawks. Love a bit of Hiram Harris. I was checking the stats, and Hiram Harris isn't like not big in the points and that, but rebounds, steals, couple of assists, like it's just that type of baller, and I like a bit of Hiram Harris. So big time for the NBL because the finals coming up as well. I believe it's this weekend. After those semi-finals, and then in the NRL, I'm kind of talking through my process here while kind of separating between the Olympics and the non-Olympics. So something has to give way, and it's the NRL. It's just the NRL. I'm going to be keeping up with the debutantes, especially, but it's the state of the NRL is such where it's a good thing to fall away. So you got a lot of big blowout wins. You've got a lot of bullshit NRL type of stuff happening. The transfer market is happening, and there's like literally no framework or structure around it. So it's just craziness, and it's just all kind of puts me off the end product, which is the game, and the game is usually decided in the first 20 minutes. So then it's like less exciting to watch. And then we've got the Warriors who, as we've stated earlier in the week, are cursed, and we don't know what's going to happen with the Warriors. So it's all a bit crazy, but that is to say that in these times, with the amount of sport on, something has to just dip away a little bit, and it's going to be the NRL for me. How are you just assessing your non-Olympic landscape and juggling the different like energy distribution? Like we've only got so much sporting energy and just work energy to spread out, and the Olympics by nature is going to take away from something else. For me, it's the NRL. What is it for you?
For me, it's probably the stuff that just by convenience isn't really, like, Steven Adams isn't playing basketball right now. That means I don't have to write about Steven Adams like every week or two. So, like, that's probably where it's coming from me. Like, there's no Wellington Phoenix as well as another example of something I'd write about quite often that just isn't in season right now. So I don't think I need to drop anything away because I just there's a natural gap in the calendar for me, which is quite convenient. And especially at a time when like Flying Kiwis is still churning away. There'll be a Flying Kiwis every week. There's always enough stuff, but it's not like I'm not going to have like 15 to 20 entries in any given week. For the next, certainly for the next month, the European season is getting closer to the beginning. Like Ryan Thomas's first competitive game was this morning because they've got European, Champions League qualifiers that they got to get through, and those things tend to happen before the actual league seasons begin. But for most like other guys based in Europe, that is something that's still a month or so away. And obviously the women are like the top tier of female Kiwi footballers are all with the Olympic squad right now. So nothing happening on a club level at that point. So I can afford to just put full focus there on the Fernies and the Ollie Whites and the various other Olympic sports that I'll be writing pretty intensely about, I think, because we sort of you ran through all the different avenues we've got for ways to update the Olympics at the start of the podcast. Like, we've got the Almost Daily podcast on Patreon. We've got the Substack newsletter. We've got the Almost Daily blog pieces that'll be coming out every few days. There's the the email that we do on Substack. There's various other like specialist articles that'll be done. There's our social media channels as well. Like it's cool that the Olympics is a nice little 2-week, like hard and fast, like, bonanza, because it's kind of the way you got to treat it, when you're trying to cover it as well. But yeah, it's kind of convenient for me that I don't have to be like trying to write articles on the Warriors or whatever, or the Black Caps or something right now, because there's nothing like that. Although I guess probably Warriors articles, unless you were going to absolutely savage them or something, which isn't the most productive thing to do. It's maybe a good time to not be writing about the Warriors.
Yeah, well, it's like, in all honesty, Warriors and cricket get a lot of views. So it's like, I'm at the point where I don't want to write about the Warriors, but I'm still I still have to have a general, well, not general, just a really, I have to maintain my interest in what's happening beneath the radar, which basically means beneath the NRL stuff, because when I do tap in back into the Warriors diary, it's going to be that stuff. It's going to be, okay, how are the junior pipelines going to look? Like, what did Phil Gould actually do in a short amount of time, and why is it not that super duper important because everything is set up, that type of angle. And then cricket, like, we're just in winter and we're waiting for T20 World Cup. Got the Kiwi County Tour, which everyone's fascinated about. That gets a lot of views, and the White Ferns coming up as well. One of these low-key things that we're keeping track of is the basketball, and I'm kind of a little bit excited about the NBL semifinals. Do want to make sure I catch the peak of the season, and we've just had news, I think, yesterday that Mr. Dion Prewster, who I Wikipedia'd him, and he's like, he's got a Samoan mother, grew up in, I think he lived a bit in Hawaii before moving to Wellington. He was born in California, and then he was raised in American Samoa, and then moved to Hawaii, and then moved to Wellington. And yeah, he's just having a good old time playing basketball out of Aotearoa. He is 31 years old, but he's moving to the Australian NBL. So just touch base with us here, Wildcard. The Kiwi contingent that is growing in the Australian NBL, and if we're thinking about the most growing sports in Aotearoa, it is basketball. So there's a lot of amazing, like, you look at the Steven Adams camps that he is having now. They, like, looking at their social media, they look like a jolly old time. Like, these kids come, like, a lot of basketball IQ is being shared. Everything's kind of catered. You got uniforms, you got accommodation, you got little living spaces. It looks like a really fun time. So I'd love to be a basketballer invited to the Steven Adams camp. Just feels like there's compounding buzz around basketball in Aotearoa at the moment, and the key angle of that is that's an idea we have been tracking for a while, and a key angle of that, or aspect of that, is the Kiwis getting picked up to play in the NBL. So what's the deal with Prewster, and how are you just assessing that whole situation?
Yeah, Dion Prewster's situation is a crazy, that's an awesome one. I absolutely adore seeing a signing like that happening, because it's not like, it's the opposite, like, end of the spectrum to the way, like, who's a good example, like, Taylor Britt's been playing as a DP for Perth the last couple of years. Like, that's also in its own way amazing, and that's great. Like, seeing younger Kiwi players getting opportunities, like, to like kickstart their career at an Australian club too, let alone a club like Perth, where, like, Britt got to taste a championship the year before, like the season before last. That's amazing, but also to see that there's additionally this opportunity for someone who's in the veteran stage of their career now. And Prewster's just won, like, the MVP of the New Zealand League. He's been absolutely amazing. Like, he's stepped up his shooting and his scoring, and he's just sort of, it's probably not the right he's probably not the right player to say he's entered, like, the Chris Paul phase of his career, but it sort of feels a little bit like that. And he's been signed up to be a backup guard for Melbourne United, which is awesome. Like, that's defending champions. He'll get to play a lot with Shea Ili on the court as well, who's also part of their second unit there. And he will reunite with Dean Vickerman, who was an assistant before he was the Breakers coach. He was an assistant with Sydney, which was where Prewster last played in the NBL, because it's been a couple of years since he was last at this level. So that's awesome. Like that's a new guy added to the crew who wasn't there last season. It's someone who's like been away from that level for a couple years and has improved their game. At age like 32, 33, whatever he would be, maybe only 30 or something like that, 30 something. Come back around and done enough to win himself another like opportunity to play at that level then, and like everything about that is just cool, man. It's just cool. The fit and the situation he's in there as well is very cool. Gets to do sort of, pretty much what Jared Kenny's been doing, I think, for the last couple of years, at Cairns and at Perth before that, which is just like the veteran presence off the bench, the guard who can sort of like make sure everyone's in the right place, provide not a bulk of scoring, but when you need a shot, he can make it. All that kind of thing. Love that. And he joins a wider contingent that doesn't seem to be shrinking. Like he's not the first. There's obvious. There was like a rash of re-signings when the league ended. Tom Vodanovic got re-signed by Sydney. Jordan Ngatai had his contract option picked up by Cairns. Isaiah Mariahuhuliafa got signed on a like full roster status after being a DP. Yanni Wetzel signed with the Breakers, moving like sideways, but another like guy re-signing in the league. And that sort of Shea Ili was another one who re-signed. Like there was a flurry of dudes being re-upped after that like record-sized contingent of New Zealanders in the league last year. And there's also been this kind of like there's still a couple who are like Jared Kenny hasn't re-signed yet. It sounds like maybe there's a decent, like probably a better than average chance that he returns to Cairns, just does the same role. Sweet as. A few others who haven't been re-signed, but there's also been a few new guys added to the crew. Like Sam Timmins getting to be a development player for the Breakers is awesome after the massive breakout year he's just had in the Kiwi NBL. Jack Salt is a good one. Jack Salt has signed with Brisbane, where he and Tyrell Harrison will basically be rotating the big man minutes, so like a Kiwi tandem there, which is awesome. And there is Max Darling did get released by Illawarra because he wasn't playing a lot. It would be interesting to see where he ends up next. He could very well pop up on another Aussie NBL roster. We'll see what happens there. And then another one to look out for, actually, just quietly, because Ty Webster is re-signed with the Breakers, but the Breakers have also made a couple interesting overseas player additions, and that kind of makes the guard situation extremely crowded. We might probably worth having a word on the Breakers in a sec, but what that sounds like is going to happen based on the people who know what they're talking about in the NBL media scene is that it seems like Corey Webster is probably going to find his way onto a different NBL roster in order for the Breakers to sign a third import player. So how that goes, we will see. I've heard Brisbane mentioned. I've heard Perth mentioned, which would be pretty cool because he obviously signed with Perth once in the past and then never actually ended up playing for them. So that could be completing the circle there. Because one or two other teams that were mentioned as well. I think Sydney, Illawarra sort of seems like that might have been in the mix. It sounds like Brisbane might be the front runners, which I think that would be a pretty cool fit for him as well. And then if you had like Corey Webster running around screens of Tyrell Harrison and Jack Salt would be fantastic. But yeah, it's safe to say like there's still most teams have roster spots remaining. I think the Breakers are about the only ones who don't, but the Breakers also are probably worth mentioning. They have retained Finn Delaney, who even the coach at the Breakers was saying that he thought Delaney was going to end up in Europe, but his European out clause expired and he didn't take up any offers there, so he will be back again as well. I don't know if we'll just fall short of last year's tally or if we'll get a big rise. I think definitely we'll have a rise in fully rostered players. I think there will be, because there were quite a few development players last year as well. I think with one or two guys having been promoted to full status, I think we might get more in the sort of overall minutes played and guys being in the rotation full time. But definitely, I would say like maybe they'll have a similar number of like overall Kiwis next season to what we had last season. Maybe they'll go above and beyond. It's definitely going to be close. Like we're not seeing any like lack of momentum. We're not seeing anyone hitting the brakes on the Kiwi NBL takeover, the Kiwi / NBL, not the Kiwi. Well, whatever, wherever we're going with that. Point being that the momentum is still full steam ahead.
How are you feeling about your NRL? Like, how do you just view the NRL right now, based on everything that's happening? Like, you do support the Dragons, you do follow the NRL, in a loose, well, not loose, but quasi loose way. Where does like NRL? Because to me, it's just the dip. It's just the season dip, and there's like things where it's like, the Melbourne Storm are just winning all their games easy, so that all the Kiwi NRL players at the Storm just have fantastic stats and fantastic records because the Storm wins every game by 40. Then you've got a James Fisher-Harris thing where he wants to be with the birth of his child, so he's not going to be there. And it's just, everything is just confined to the funnel of Kiwi NRL debutants for me. But as someone who just kind of watches the NRL to watch your team and just to enjoy an entertaining product, how are you feeling and how are you just kind of factoring in the NRL to whatever zone you're in now?
Yeah, I hadn't really thought about it on that line of thinking. I would say I'm not majorly buzzed about my own team. I still think they're a decent chance to make the top 8, which is weird, but they just seem to be on one week and off the next, so it don't really, and even then they're not going to win a finals game. And it does feel like the finals series is like there's basically 6 teams who are already guaranteed there at this stage with still several weeks to go, and I don't see a lot of hope for anyone from outside that, even if they do. Like, whoever finishes 7th and 8th is probably losing in round 1, and then that's done. But I don't know. I'm still watching a game or 2 extra a week, and I'm enjoying the spectacle. And they're not a lot of close games. That's true, and that has been like, I think that has been a factor in people being a little bit fatigued about the NRL in 2021. But at the same time, like when I'm watching games as a neutral, I'm keeping an eye out on Kiwi players, but I'm also just kind of like trying to see some good entertainment and just seeing a lot of tries, and especially like some incredibly like exciting tries. You're getting teams carving through oppositions and scoring like amazing spectacle like feats of athleticism kind of tries. Like that's always enjoyable to watch, whether it's like the icing on the cake of a 56-4 win or something, or it'd probably be a little bit better if it was a last minute try to force golden point or something like that. But it's still like, I don't know. I think some of the chat is overblown, but there's obviously a point to be made about the way that the NRL has pushed, and like the difference between the best teams and the lesser teams is just as big as it's been in memory. But I don't know, all sports go through ebbs and flows like this. It's not like unusual. There are rule changes that have exacerbated things, but then like after a while, we've seen heaps with the NBA is another good example of a league that changes rules often to try and supposedly like keep up to date with the entertainment value of the sport and the just the modern players and what people want to see and all this. Like that's something that like taking lessons from the NBA, the league catches up. Like after a while, the league will catch up. I can see, like, I don't know. It's a tricky one to get a handle on right now, because it's like even Origin was a blowout, and it's not the best indication of where the sport is, but I do definitely believe in like the ebbs and flows of these things. So I'm trying not to overthink that side of thing, and just like if you know, old mate Adokar scores 5 tries in his next game or something like that, I'm still going to enjoy that and be like, damn, man, that dude scored 5 tries. That's amazing. Whether or not his team wins by 50 points or whatever. Like, it's still cool to see people doing good things.
Yeah, I think the NRL is just in the phase where they are craving finals game. Or they're craving, like, this team needs to win
definitely.
to get into the top 8. Those are... Because you look at how... So the NBA finals and playoffs, well, finals especially, it's just such a different beast to the regular season. The whole game changes. The way the game is refereed changes, and different priorities become put to the fore. That's where you see a greater... That's why defense wins championships, because in those moments, it is defense that genuinely wins you a championship, because the game changes. And it kind of changes naturally. Like, that's when shit gets real. You need to win to fulfill your goal, to get your objective. You need to win, and it's just high pressure sports, and that's why the Olympics is cool, because it's about who's the fastest in this race now, who's going to win the gold medal match. That's the peak of the pinnacle of sport. And we're just in that phase with the NRL where a lot of the games don't have that intensity. But the good thing for the NRL is just how crazy it is. So if you are watching Bulldogs versus Rabbitohs, you're going to see Lachlan Lewis take down Cody Walker going off to half time.
Yeah.
And you genuinely laugh out loud. And you're like, wow, that happened. I've never seen, like, that happens in a lot of different rugby league games, NRL games to be specific, and it's kind of like, well, you never know what's going to happen, or what kind of little drama or what kind of try is going to be scored, and that's fun in the NRL. It just doesn't have the every game matters intensely right now. And the other thing about the NRL is that, so the NRL's all moved to Queensland, so that means all the New South Wales Rugby League has stopped, because obviously there's COVID in Sydney and all that shit. So the only reserve grade being played is Queensland. So you don't have any New South Wales competitions, which basically for me just means checking on Kiwis and the team lists and stuff like that. But all that's taken away. So you've got the NRL, and then you've only got one reserve grade competition happening up in Queensland. So it's kind of like there's, below the NRL, you've got half of the reserve grade isn't playing, and then half is. And if you want to get really nitty gritty and deep in the mangroves about it, it's actually quite strange, because so Brisbane, Gold Coast, North Queensland, and the Warriors, who have Redcliffe, Melbourne Storm have Sunshine Coast, Falcons, those teams all have reserve grade players playing. Whereas the New South Wales team, there's no New South Wales reserve grade, and they might have taken additional players into their Queensland hub, but they're not affiliated with any Queensland reserve grade team, so they're not going to be able to play Intrust Super Cup in Queensland. So it's actually, when you think about it, it's a weird advantage-disadvantage thing, because all the Queensland teams and the Warriors have all their reserve grade systems in place. New South Wales clubs, there's no New South Wales reserve grade, and then those players who are surplus to the NRL, they can't go into the Queensland competition. So it's a bit strange, although it doesn't seem to help. Like, Gold Coast Titans got smoked by the Eels without actually having to move anything. Brisbane lost to the West Tigers. That's actually a good point to wrap up on this, but getting into those Tigers debutants. Cowboys lost as well, I think. So the Cowboys, Broncos, and Titans didn't have to move anything. I think they all played in their home stadiums. Like, Titans played at Cbus, Broncos played at Suncorp, Cowboys were up in Townsville. They moved absolutely nothing, other than maybe the times, I think, changed of a couple of games, and they all lost. Like, how weird is that?
Very weird. Yeah, I know you're putting a bookmark in for the Warriors stuff at the moment and closing that book just for now. But I do have a question in relation to the New Zealand Breakers and probably chuck some Wellington Phoenix in there as well, because like I obviously have a complicated relationship with the Breakers. The way like I don't know. There's a weird difference between the way the Breakers present themselves and the way the Breakers seem to actually be operating. But that's something I've written about plenty, so anyone listening to this probably understands what I'm talking about already. It's like I find off season is the most enjoyable time for the Breakers. This is a tangent, but this is when like you get to see which lesson, because there's one thing there's a lot of things you can say about the Breakers and their current ownership and their current sort of incarnation, but one thing that I think is unfair to say would be that they don't learn from mistakes. They definitely do. They pay attention. They make adjustments each season based on like what's been like going wrong previously. Not necessarily for everything, but that's why the off season is interesting, because you get to see which lessons have been learned. And the way they're putting their roster together, we haven't had this Hugo Besson dude like announced yet, and we haven't had. I think probably part of that is because he had to like wait till he had officially withdrawn from the upcoming NBA draft, because he wants to go in there next time. So he's coming over here. He's the top scorer in the French second division. So he's a very good player, like young dude, hoping to be drafted next time. He's basically going to be a next star, but because we've already got a next star with Ousmane Dieng, so two young French guys on the roster, which I think is probably risky for sure, but also I would imagine those two will appreciate having each other, like having another French speaker on the same team, whereas RJ Hampton, when he was here, did not seem to really be able to relate to anyone else, just based on the rumors that were coming out and a couple of the stories from the American perspective of things that emerged about that. And then Peyton Sievers, the other guy who's been talked about, is coming in. And the interesting thing with that is, like, Peyton Sievers is a very good player. He's played NBA for the Detroit Pistons for a bit. He's been doing amazing things, and I think it's Germany where he's been playing most recently. That's cool. I do find he's a very similar player to Ty Webster, and this is why like Corey Webster's probably gonna leave. Because they need to clear up a roster spot to be able to sign another import player. They're already using one of their import spots on a guy who's basically a development player, or a step above that, basically a next star, we'll say. Which is like there's one ball. You've got William McDowell White in there as well, Ty Webster, Peyton Sievers, there's Besson dude. Let alone guys like Finn Delaney and Tom Abercrombie, who would obviously like to get a few shots up themselves. Like it's an interesting roster, and it's a roster that seems to have a lot of like, the idea seems to, it's the same, like this is one thing that hasn't changed with the Breakers under Matt Walsh's ownership, under Dan Shamir's coaching, that like the idea has been, we will get the best talent and we will make it work. Like we trust that our coach knows what he's doing and we believe in that dude. And we're gonna like just get the players, get the best like possible conglomeration of abilities, and then hope he can turn that into a winning basketball team, which he hasn't really done to this point. Which is where it gets interesting, and which is where there are some like parallels there, where I think like last season was just such a frustrating year for the Breakers, where they just didn't achieve anything close to what they said they were going to, and blah, blah, blah. Questions about the coach have been knocked back. He's been re-signed, so obviously they don't think that was the issue. I think there's definitely a lot of, like, it was such a difficult season for the players. They were living away from home, and, like, none of that should be belittled, but I do wonder if that's, like, I don't know if that's the only thing that was up with the Breakers last season. Definitely injuries were another one, whether you can, like, blame that, but then 2 seasons in a row where injuries have been a focus. Maybe you do need to put a bit of pressure on the coach for playing some of his key players in like long extended minutes and driving guys into the ground. Maybe this is why key guys keep getting injured, because they've got carrying such a workload. So like, suffice to say, there's a lot of things we could chuck up if we're doing a list of why the Breakers. In fact, I've already written this article, come to think of it, right, why the Breakers didn't achieve what they should have last season. I think the Warriors are in an interesting case too, because they're doing the same thing. They're living away from home. They're They've got a newish coach, well, a newer coach than Dan Shamira's. Dan Shamira's been there longer than Brownie has. So, like, that whole dynamic though is interesting. How a new coach sort of like gets how much leeway do they get? How long is the honeymoon period, sort of thing? You're obviously not going to rip a dude after like one season, but how much longer do you get? Dan Shamir still seems to be getting big backups from his club, even though he hasn't really done a heap there. The Wellington Phoenix are a slightly more curious one because they actually did quite well in the bubble. If they had been able to play home games in Wellington, I think they would definitely have made the finals last season. As it was, they only narrowly missed out. Still, all things considered, I think they probably did, a very commendable effort over the course of that season. Let themselves down as they tend to do. The last couple of years, it's been the same deal where they just like slow starts, keep being a little bit too much to overcome, but so it goes. I'm curious where you lie with the Warriors, though, when you look at how just the overall fact that they haven't been that good this year compared to what they could have been. And just even in the last 3 weeks, like, they were right there. I think we did a podcast a couple of weeks ago where I said I still thought they were going to make the top 8. But that was because I expected them to beat the Dragons, and then I expected them to do a little better against like a weakened Penrith team, and there was another game in there that was was it Cowboys, something like that, I can't remember. Around was it Sharks? It was Sharks, wasn't it? Like the last 3 weeks, they've had games where they could have gone on a run, could have gone on a roll, could have won all 3, could have been putting themselves in great position to make the finals, lost all 3 instead, and probably looks like their season is petering out now. Where do you what are your feelings on that in relation to some of the like stuff I was saying about the Breakers? Do you think it's fair just to say that the COVID situation makes this a bit of a write-off, or are there questions that should be asked about the coach, which I definitely do think is the case about the Breakers, even though the club club re-signed the coach and is this major assistant, so that's obviously not something they're considering, but I don't know, do you see what I'm saying though? Like, is there a correlation, you think, in terms of like why things haven't been what they are? Because there is that like one overlapping factor for both these teams, which is that they haven't really had the luxury of home games. They haven't had their own crowd. They haven't been able to sleep in their own beds before games. Like, it's hard to know just how much of a major factor that is, but like, at the same time, there are other factors that are quite clearly at play for teams like not reaching their potential. So I don't know. It's a long-winded way of saying, like, do you see similar parallels there between the Breakers situation and the Warriors situation? Do you think there are like extenuating factors? Do you think the season was just a transition year anyway, and it doesn't really matter because like it's next season when you can actually judge this project and where they're going or whatever? Is there a line of logic through any of what I've just said there?
Yeah, you're tapping into a few different ideas that we have talked about. If you don't believe in the Warriors curse, I think the Warriors and the Breakers, so maybe me creating this Warriors curse as a coping mechanism, like, I'm completely fine for that to be the case. Because if you look at the Breakers and the Warriors, you can say that the Breakers are handling everything equally as bad. The difference is historically. This is the Breakers aren't so good, and that is different to their history. Their history is a dynastic organization, and we can come to our own conclusions of where that ends and where being shit begins. The Warriors, on the other hand, everything is in tune with the entire history. It's just that the circumstance is different. So that's where we get into the curse, because somehow, magically, the Warriors have done the same thing in extremely different circumstance. Their 2 seasons almost, of being based in Australia has yielded literally the same results of them being based in New Zealand. So that's where we get into the curse. Like that, I think the curse, because then if you're not taking the curse and those the context around the Warriors into play, then you're thinking Nathan Brown's a shit coach, the Warriors are a shit organization, Cameron George sucks, everyone else sucks as well. Whereas we've discussed, it doesn't matter who are the people, the faces in these positions for the Warriors, the same things have happened. So I find it really hard to get into the individual stuff when I'm just watching another coach do what Andrew McFadden did, do what Matthew Elliott did, do what Stephen Kearney did, do what, whoever else, Tony Iro, whoever else, whatever other coach we want to put in that category, it's the same stuff. So I think the Warriors and the Breakers are different in that regard. But again, that might just be a coping mechanism, because I also told you that the Warriors would do a far better job than the Breakers, because the Warriors, unlike the Breakers and the Phoenix, I was saying that the Warriors learned from the stuff that they experienced in their first year of being based in Australia. That wasn't exactly massively coming into fruition, but there are factors at play there, like not being able to have a home ground at the Central Coast Stadium, whatever that was. Those type of things. And then just how much the team has changed from how it was looking round one to how it looks now. I find it very difficult to, that has to be some sort of factor as well, but that factor was at least brought on by the Warriors. And then you're going into preparing for next season, and that's where I brought up the bridge idea, that this season was a bridge to get to next season, because we've also had the news that Roger Tuivasa-Sheck's going to leave, we've had the news that Sean Johnson is going to return, and those type of things were at play, where I was like, well, Chad Townsend isn't playing fantastically well, so as soon as there wasn't a steady halves combination with Chanel Harris-Tavita suffering a long-term injury, then I was like, well, shit, now we're definitely in this bridge category where we're just trying to get into next season, when hopefully things will be a bit different with COVID and all that stuff. So I believe the Warriors are definitely in a bridge phase, but the bridge phase is a little bit more exciting because I can see a path in which the Warriors make the top 8 this year, because you've got some very robust forwards. Fanua Blake, Matt Lodge, Dylan Watene-Zelezniak's running like a psycho every time. Reece Walsh can get more repetitions in, especially if he's playing with Chad Townsend. Chad Townsend's only going to feel more comfortable in his specific role, steering the Warriors around. And I like the Warriors' personnel in this current version of the NRL, so I can see them being successful this year, which is just something to keep an eye on. But assessing the Warriors' landscape and trying to summarize where they're at right now, and then I'll let you tie that into the Breakers, how you interpret that. I think it's definitely a bridge stage now. So if that means that you want the best case scenario you can get from this season. So that is first crack the top 8, make the finals. If you can't make the top 8 and crack the finals, you need to get some younger players who are going to be there over the next 2 years. You need to get them some game time, and then the season's over. So then we're moving into, now Sean Johnson's back. Now we've got Sean Johnson combining with Reece Walsh. You've got a very aggressive, robust, big forward pack that seems suitably designed for the NRL. So if we're taking the curse out of the equation, where maybe the curse just chops all that down in some way, shape or form, I see a bright future for the Warriors, especially when they can stop splitting their junior pathway between two countries, which is a minor miracle that's happened. If I'm thinking recruitment, they've got the best recruiter. No more Phil Gould. Fuck Phil Gould. Fuck the Bulldogs. They can be a rival now as well. See how those two clubs compare over the next 2 to 3 years will be really interesting. But the Warriors, everything just seems pretty good. Good junior pipelines happening across two countries. That's impressive. You've got a pretty good roster moving forward. You have still got good, smart people running the club, solid ownership. If all of that stuff is taken care of, hopefully get back to playing games at Mount Smart, get a bit of buzz going, and benefit from the home crowds. I'm still in on a bright future with the Warriors, and right now I think we're just in the bridge to that. Maybe it's an end point, but it's also an end point that we don't even know is going to happen, because who's to say when the Warriors will play at Mount Smart again, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, it was going to be in a couple of weeks, but now it's not going to be in a couple of weeks. So, and it's hard to know how much, like, you can't really quantify just how much of a setback that is to not have those home games, and the home crowds and all that kind of thing, like, and the living away from home, and like, because that's the one overlapping factor of all of these like Kiwi teams and Aussie competitions over the last year or two. And the Breakers didn't get a false start. Well, what would you call it? Like they didn't get a dummy run of it. Like the Warriors basically have done this for the majority of 2 seasons at this point in a row. The Phoenix had like a couple months and then a full season. The Breakers, their season was over when the pandemic first struck. So when they, like, their most recent season was the only time they've had to do that. I will say it's hard to quantify how much of a setback that is both on and off the court. I will say I heard a lot more mentioning that. I won't say like using it as an excuse, because I think it is a valid excuse. I was just like mentioning the mindset, thinking of that, like rather than like belittling the idea, because there's nothing to belittle there. It's obviously really difficult to be living in a different country and not being able to go home and see your family and all these kind of things. Let alone not having a home crowd cheering you on in your big games and whatnot. Like, that's not to be belittled, but I will say I definitely heard like the Breakers mentioning that point a whole lot more. The Phoenix basically never use it as an excuse, which is weird, because I almost wondered if they would be the worse off, because I just didn't get the idea that they were quite, I don't know, it's a mixed bag there, because you do have a younger squad, so there's not as much of like, leaving the kids behind or anything like that, and you had a few more Australians and international players, so maybe like on a personnel level they were, and an Australian coach as well, and maybe on a personnel level they were best suited to that. I don't know, and then maybe that's why they didn't really, they just sort of focused on what they were doing and didn't mention that as like as an excuse, even though it clearly was. Like, if, as I said before, if they had the ability to play at Sky Stadium and get those like caked in crowds in, and have other teams having to like travel to another country in order to play them, they'd have made the top 6 for sure. I'm not sure about the Warriors, where, I don't know, I'm not as zoned in, but I haven't really heard a lot of complaining about that. There have been a couple of cases where people haven't like, I don't know, I don't want to like talk about David Fusitu'a here or whatever, because that's obviously a thing that we can't speculate upon. But yeah, I don't know. The Breakers definitely made more mention of the difficulties of their season. I think maybe if you're more aware of those things, it's either reflective of like the fact that you're struggling, and it's just like putting it out there and not covering your ass, because as I said, it's probably a valid excuse, but the fact that they were a team that made more mention of it is probably reflective of the fact that they fell further short of expectations than the others, because like, as we said, the Phoenix came close to making the top 6, didn't quite do it, but at least they were competitive down the stretch. Like, the Warriors are still in with a chance of making the top 8, and if they'd gotten on a roll a little bit earlier, they probably would have made the top 8. They're at least that good. They've been disappointing. I hadn't thought about it until you mentioned it, just how much that team has changed since from round 1 to where we are now. It's actually insane, but I think there's actually quite a few NRL teams you could say that about the season as well. But like, I'm just trying to think about how much I don't know how that compares to what the Breakers went through. But I think I think it is easier to say because of the Tuivasa-Sheck thing, because Nathan Brown's his first full year of coaching, because of the like disruptions as well mid-season, like the pack your bags, we're going to Queensland whole journey. I think it is easier to say that the Warriors are, and because they seem to be rebuilding their squad anyway. That does feel like this is easy. It's easier to label this a transition year for them because you can see what they're building towards. With the Breakers, I think they were probably supposed to already be at the building towards point. That you could have said the transition year was the year before, and this next one was the one where you learn your lessons, do what you got to do, compete for a championship. Again, they missed the playoffs though, so. But at the same time, they had to do the whole thing playing in Australia without fans and all that kind of stuff. So is that enough of it's obviously a fair excuse. Is it enough of a one to say this is why they fell so far short of expectations? I am skeptical. I think there's more going on there, but I will accept the case that the Warriors are maybe not in that same, like, is there more going on? Yes, but there's more going on in a way where they're at least working towards a point, and you can see what they're working towards, and there's logic behind it. So I don't know. I think we've solved this issue in my head. I think we've come around to a point where I'm able to get my head around what how these two situations overlap, but also how they differ.
And I think ultimately it's just quite simple. Like I think you're seeing the holistically good organizations be in stronger positions. I don't think that's anything dramatic or insightful to say. When we're ranking those three organizations, the Phoenix and Warriors just seem a lot more healthy. They seem a lot more stable, and better equipped to deal with what it is that they're dealing with. Whereas the Breakers, even just this mere idea of having a fresh ownership group, let alone like how we think of that ownership group, just having a new ownership group coming into 2020, like not necessarily starting in 2020, but just kind of like 2020 was one of their major situations to deal with as a new ownership group. I think you're just seeing the solidity of the Warriors and Phoenix and their standing within the current competitions, maybe, and that's how that's playing out. So, but yeah, maybe wrap it up, and we will come back. We'll try to do a almost daily podcast for the Patrons tomorrow. Busy times in the Olympics. We got the bit of football. Football Ferns lost. Now we got the Ollie Whites. Are they still the Football Ferns, or is that a different Olympic name for them?
Yeah, they're still the Football Ferns because it's like a full senior international competition on the women's side of things, and the men's side of things it's normally under 23s, but under 24s this year because of the delay, because of the year delay. So they had to. I don't know why they had to, but they, for whatever reason, at some point way back in history, someone decided that we needed to come up with a different nickname for the men's Olympic team, and this is what they stumbled upon.
So if there was like
the biggest travesty, of course, about calling them the Ollie Whites is that Oliver White, from most recently of Team Wellington, and I think he plays for he's either at Miramar or Wellington Olympic. He's at one of the two big dog clubs in Wellington there, or one of the two of four, arguably, depends where you want to draw that line. But the dude called Ollie White narrowly missed out on selection for the Ollie Whites is the big travesty here.
Shout out to the Ollie Whites. Shout out to Ollie White. And shout out to the Football Ferns. Shout out to anyone listening to this, wherever you may be around the world. Samoa, Nigeria, Kazakhstan, Compton, Buenos Aires, Huaizhou, wherever you are. Big it up to yourself, kia kaha, stay